Flashy thrills versus broken sites. Why some brands still ignore their digital foundations.
Good afternoon. My name is Oliver De Bono. I am the co-founder of Quantum Gaming. I'm joined here today with my esteemed panelists, veterans in the industry, and we're here to talk about an interesting subject. You know, flashy thrills. What are brands doing today to fundamentally separate themselves from their competitors? Essentially, we operate in a global industry. Many of our partners here today and our panelists here today have insights into specific geos, and I'm here to delve a little bit into this subject. So I want to kick off, Nikola, with you, just because we're in a very similar field, okay? First, quick introduction about yourself, and then a little bit about the area you're focused in.
Okay. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So, I'm the managing director of the Odys. We are working on the acquisition side of the things, mostly in the European Tier 1 markets. The channels we operate, obviously, mostly the SEO, but as well some paid campaigns, and as well we are working closely with operators on a way to get the most out of the campaigns that we are running.
Well, take over to you.
Hello everyone, Wojtek Stellmach, Baxi Empire. We are a paid media and creative agency operating mainly with the US market, North America, but also with regulated brands overseas.
Simon?
You smile as if I don't need introduction. Oliver, I'm Simon Westbury, working with 1X. I think everyone probably in the room knows who they are as one of the biggest global brands operating in this space. So to facilitate discussion, I'm going to let you take over from that point.
Fantastic. Look, this is really interesting. I think one of the key factors here is we've got 3 different core areas, which I really want to kind of dig into. Now, Nikola, we spoke off stage. We're in a similar field. We're both Tier 1 European markets. And I think essentially what we're seeing today is a little bit of a loop around in regards to where we're throwing our brands. Essentially, we started in organics. We moved over to PPC and paid media. We're now in the world of social. The land-based advertising isn't as strong, I think, in the European markets. What's working online? Where are brands going? Where is the smart money going?
So, obviously, depends a lot on the market, right, itself. The way how we are doing it is that basically you have to test it out first to see which channel is actually working at the start. Obviously, to collect the data, to collect the knowledge, so your team actually can learn. But the team who is behind the operations, right, who is running the CRM, retention, and everything else. And then once the data is being collected, you can actually start focusing on what is working the best for you. Obviously, acquisition is becoming more and more expensive. And I'm a big fan of this saying when you should understand that every click counts, right? So everyone should try to get the most out of that click, basically.
Okay, but so, I mean, what about acquisition sources? If we dive into it, I see a lot of brands today. The market has changed. We had the period of streamers. Today you have big brands buying streamers. They don't actually advertise with them anymore. They acquire their entire channel. It's changed. There was saturation. I believe a consolidation is coming. But staying on this one, Nikola, I mean, let's talk about, for example, I don't know, Scandinavian markets. Very strong streaming market, PPC market, organic market. Where is the smart money there? Would you recommend, you know, with the cost of PPC today, to stay in that field?
Not really. Not really, but because of many more factors as well, like the competition as well. Those are the super valuable markets and super competitive as well. The biggest value is still coming from the SEO because of the intent, right? You exactly can evaluate what the search intent is, and then based on that, you can form your product, right? You can form the retargeting campaigns based on the intent, and if you're good with that, you can get the most of the value in the long term. If you're doing the short term, if the product is not well optimized for like the SEO channel, for the paid channels and all of that, you're just going to claim the short boost, but in the long term, your team is going to be totally lost, basically, in order to evaluate what is actually working well. So I'm coming back to the collecting the data. Obviously, every product is different. You mentioned Scandinavia, right? But how many countries you have there? And each one of them is different. So you need to adapt to every single market again. But when it comes to the value, definitely SEO. Yes, influencers are great, but are they creating like the long-term stability and value, or is it just short-term gain?
No, I 100% agree. I mean, look, if you don't have a decent funnel set up, you're wasting money. We know this.
Exactly.
But I want to turn over a little bit to stateside, sweeps, you know, there's a big hype around that market. Wojtek, I know this is your area. I mean, are you using the traditional, let's call it acquisition points that we've used in the more mature gaming sector in Europe, and then running them through similar funnels? But what is the ultimate difference? Is there a difference between acquisition and sweeps, for example? Oh. Check. Maybe no? Maybe we can try another mic? There we go. I think you might need to hold it down. No. See if one of the other mics work. Can we get some mic support here?
Hello, hello. Okay.
There we go.
Here we go. Yes, it a little bit depends on the maturity of the brand as well. What we observe nowadays, it's a lot of new brands coming into the space with literally millions of budgets, and they quite vary between channels. It's not just paid, just streamers, just brand ambassadors, or offline presence within, like, ATL channels, CTV, radio, and the usual stuff. But it's quite a mix of things. Of course, SEO and Google traffic was always, I think it's always been, and it always will be, at least until AI takes over more and more, the most valuable traffic, right? Google PPC, Google Ads, and SEO. But SEO, of course, it's a long-term game, right? So I think it's pretty much, first you need to identify if it's, we are talking about new brands coming to the space or mature brands being in the space for a couple of years, because the focus on your advertising spend, marketing spend will change accordingly to that. A lot of brands are starting mainly with paid media at the beginning, where obviously a lot of spillover of this traffic goes onto organic search and direct search. And a lot of brands I see at the moment are forgetting to focus on this early SEO, branded SEO, most of all at the very early days. To actually work on the foundation of the product, right? So I had the cases, that brands were live for like 1 year, spending 2, 3, 4 million a month in, just in like Meta advertising and TikTok and Snapchat, and then you Google the brand and the page is not crawlable. You cannot even identify and find the brand on the first page of the search. Of course, you lose a ton of your revenues and ton of your marketing spend just goes into the air, right? So
that's really interesting, because that's a subject that we're actually tackling now, defensive SEO, right? If your position online is not strong enough, it's so easy for someone to capitalize on that, to buy your keywords, to take your brand name. But I want to kind of pivot a little bit on this question. I mean, we know stateside, you're talking about essentially one of the largest, well, the largest commercial market, and also one of the most expensive markets in the world to advertise to. I mean, your risk factor is much higher. That being the case, what insights would you give the audience in regards to where do you start? Do you build up your organics and forget spending money until you're ready, or at least semi-prepared?
I think the question here would be, okay, if we are entering the market, is my product ready? Do I have the base, the right CRM tool in place? Do I have right segmentation of CRM? Do I have, a mobile app or product, ready for these organic searches, right? Then, of course, if you are catering for streamers, do I have a certain tournaments or gamification tool embedded or in-house built tool embedded into the product? If I'm going for a brand ambassador, am I able to, or sponsoring, for example, right? Am I able to cater for follow-up with paid media spent on retargeting campaigns, on maybe CTV presence to be visible all around and use the ambassador image or use the sponsoring in terms of like collaborations with, let's say it's a football club, right? Collaboration with the club to get some merchandise around tournaments, loot boxes, stuff like this. It, of course, depends on the product, but I would say nowadays it's kind of, you need to build a matrix around, touch a little bit of each.
Let me ask you an essential question, and I think this is an interesting one, even for my own curiosity. Do you see much of a difference between, let's call it sweeps and a standard brand, the retention rate? Is there that much of a difference?
Oh yes, most definitely.
Good or bad?
Depends on which side, of course. Of course, the regulated gaming in the US, we are talking completely about different, monster of a focus when it comes to marketing, brand maturity. Only a couple of states are regulated, right? When you are talking about sweeps, you have massive saturation of new brands coming with a couple of million investment right away. A lot of them just burning the budgets. A little bit stupidly because they are not ready for product-wise. They are not ready with CRM in place. They are not ready with a VIP program or segmentation, and they just burn money. They think it's easy win, but it's not. You need to. I still think that everything starts from the product, from having your house internally organized before you are able to actually start, pump up, and retain the customers most of all, right? Because it's, let's say, relatively easy to acquire, not so easy to retain them.
Well, this is an interesting one because we obviously, as a, let's call it a white label provider, we've seen a very similar pattern. And obviously, your initial marketing campaign, without solid retention, you're going to see a decent amount of revenue in your early days. But you need to take into account that that has to cover not only your initial setup cost, your obviously outgoings, your PPC, your socials. So you might see a spike, but then the retention rate is extremely low. Your churn, your drop-off is very, very fast.
What we see right now that happens very often in the space as well is, everyone looks at, my hold, so they look at the deposits, purchases, what's coming in, they look at the potential withdrawals or redemptions, right? But they do not have the right BI, right, data in place as well to analyze, what's the generosity, what's the bonus cost, and they burn a lot of money early days for sometimes stupid, so to say, bonusing of the player just to retain him even more so, especially in the sweep space. It's in the social space, it's even more so than in the real money gaming, right? So it's
It's true.
Again, foundation.
Yeah, you need to definitely have the right retention programs in place. But then I want to shift it, Simon, because I want to talk a little bit top level. 1X, one of the industry giants, they've got a fantastic market penetration strategy in a number of global geos. I mean, what's the take? Okay, different budgets, different level, but it came from somewhere. It was built with a strategy in mind. How are they expanding into these new geos, Africa and whatnot? What is the goal here, the long term, to retain the player, to build brand awareness? Where do you draw that line? Where is the value?
Yeah, I think there's no simple answer to that question. You obviously want to retain players, but you also want to grow. I mean, from a 1X perspective, obviously, when we look at it, we've got a very global but very local strategy. I hate the word global, so I'm not going to say it. So obviously, on the very top level brand awareness, we have partnerships with FC Barcelona, Paris Saint-Germain, announced the deal in Peru with Sporting Cristal last week. So that's very high level. And brand awareness is important for visibility and credibility. But apart from that, you need a strategy that looks at digital, because you can't ignore digital. So it all has to come together. And obviously, you can't have one global strategy. Hence why, I've mentioned some deals with football, but we also work with FIBA, because not everyone likes football. People like basketball. And what we do, for example, in Africa, as you mentioned, is we actually do tournaments in jurisdictions that we're active in for amateur sports players to get involved in, to drive awareness of the brand, build trust, but also we've started to use these tools to promote player protection. So as part of 1X Cup in Nigeria, we're using that opportunity to engage with the local market to talk about player protection and a tool we have there called 1X Balance. So you need brand awareness for credibility, and obviously 1X has created a global profile that is large. I don't want to say second to none. I'm going to be a bit humble. But at the same time, we understand the local markets and things need to be different. And these guys have spoken very well about SEO and funnels. And SEO is important to us, but it's important as part of wider engagement of digital channels. Is that social media? Is that our CRM? Is that our affiliates? And how do we build a whole-scale vision for what 1X wants to achieve?
Well, this is exactly it. And I like this because we're talking about essentially three different worlds, right? The more mature European markets, the newly saturated sweeps in the States, and then more of a classical approach. But to circle back round, Nikola, we've spoken a lot about Europe. Things are changing. There is saturation. We've gone back to social media. But it feels to me a little bit more about just marketing campaigns. And very few brands are actually building brand awareness or brand names. You've had restrictions in many markets for sponsoring sports teams. Where do we stand today? How are brands going to differentiate themselves essentially from what seems to be a cash grab market today?
So brands need to start rolling their sleeves, right? The days where the brands should just focus on the acquisition, right, are long time gone, right? They should roll the sleeves and start working on that channels that are all working for the same goal to bring the revenue, right? The problem is like, all these channels, like the social media, like the influencer and all of that, in some way or another, everything comes back to the SEO, right? Because in the end of the day, they're all going to Google the brand name, right? You have to protect your brand name. You mentioned it. You have to protect your name as well. But then you need to make sure that it's not only about like the exposure and visibility, like Simon mentioned, like, okay, they're very huge and big popular brand, right? But that's different in their case. But let's speak about the fresh brands, right? Like that's such an easy target. They need to do and work on the protection. They need to work on the product. They need to work on, the CRM and everything else in order to make, again, the most out of every marketing channel, right? And that's how they're gonna make the difference. Like marketing campaigns that you just set and forget, it's not gonna work anymore.
It's true.
There should be like a good relationships between the marketing team and the product team as well. And I think that many brands are actually missing that. Like the product team has no idea what the marketing team is doing.
100%. Simon, I know you want to jump in on this.
Yeah, I just want to mention, actually, that's an interesting point because we can talk about brand awareness, we can talk about SEO, we can talk about digital channels. But if you don't get your product right, everything else becomes irrelevant to me. Because if you're driving people to your website and your product doesn't meet the local market, or a very good member of one of my past sales team, they did a demonstration and they started with payments. And I was like, everyone laughs about payment. And they said, well, we started with payments because if you don't have the payment for that market, there's no point selling the product. So I think it's very important to understand what your brand is, what you're trying to build. And that comes down to being, I think everyone would say, entertainment and exciting, but your product has to match your values. So, yeah, you can go and work with FC Barcelona, but FC Barcelona is one of the biggest global football brands there is, and your product has to match that around sports, games, and local appeal to local markets.
100%. I mean, this is kind of the age-old saying. I know it's cliche, but your product is your brand at the end of the day. And then I look at certain brands that essentially don't need to market anymore. There's a number of brands I can think of on the top of my head. They don't need to market their product anymore because people know how good they are. It's kind of like, let's talk about a different industry for a second, is you never see an advert for a Lamborghini. This is the concept that we're kind to look at. But, I mean, it sounds very easy to say, a good product, fantastic. I mean, but what essentially makes it? I really like that you touched on payments because one of the biggest issues in our industry is payments. You can have the best product in the world, the nicest UI, the fastest website. If you can't take a payment, you don't have a leg to stand. Nikola, I know you want to jump in on this one.
If you don't have the payment, you can shut down the business. Simple as it is, right?
Okay, but I'm not stating the obvious like having no payments. I'm talking about high declines, right? And that's an interesting subject to go into because if a player is going to struggle to use your site, even if you've got them, acceptance rates are at an all-time low across the industry. We know that. We're seeing this in Europe.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, acquisition flows should be on a very high level, right? There should be such simple way for the players actually to complete all the steps, right? You cannot just send them to the generic homepage, right? You should have the separate landing pages, you should have the separate, I don't know, promo codes, whatever can help you actually to track them, right?
I think that obviously in regulated markets, and we're growing more and more with over 35 licenses, you've got KYC, you've got all your requirements around there, but what you want to do is give the player, how do I put this? You kind of want to give them a non-intrusive experience. So it's as simple as you can make it and as intuitive as you can make it within the regulation. And I think that's a challenge always, because especially in more and more regulated markets, you know, the UK with, you know, talking about how much money do you earn depends how much money you can bet. You know, being British, we don't like talking about how much we earn. So I think you have to be adaptable, but also we talk about personalization a lot, etc. But to me, it's about making the process as least intrusive but smooth and engaging. And I think that's what Amazon did very well years ago with the 2-click buy. You could buy everything within 2 clicks. So that's not always possible, regulatory, but you do want to make it as smooth and non-intrusive as possible for the end user.
100%. Look, just a bit of kind of background here. We found that there are models you can use. So next area, I actually wanted to change gear a little bit and look into funnel drop-offs, right? We know that funnel drop-offs payments are an obvious one, but what isn't an obvious one? One of the questions I wanted to bring up was, you know, your product, your site speed. I think essentially today, you can have the most beautiful UI in the world. Question, Wojtek, for you, speed versus UI, what is more important?
Tricky, but I think it's speed.
Speed. So essentially, this is the irony of it. I've seen products go to market of late with nothing but a simple game.
I think sometimes as well, beautiful, saturated UI can kill the speed. So
well, that's
also optimization on it.
Yeah, that's the actual reason I'm asking, because you know there is such a thing as over design, right? And essentially, this is what I believe does create complexities for players. You don't want to go into the direction where you try to make it pretty, but we have a saying, you know, ultimately you have a goal for that player. Land, play, repeat. This is the task of the brand. And in between, you try to build a couple of unique experiences. But talking about this is something that, you know, it's a much deeper conversation. Unfortunately, we're not going to make it with the time we have left. But I want to talk to you about it, Nikola, because my next question goes into gamification. And we saw in Europe, probably 5 to 7 years ago, everything was about gamification. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's died off somewhat. What's your take on using gamification to retain players?
I think it switched a lot over the last few years, right? For me now, everything moves more towards simplicity, right? As you mentioned, sometimes you can overload everything, the product itself, right? And now, you know, I think after the COVID time, especially, like the most valuable thing that we acknowledge is like the time, right? That's as well my answer, like what's more important, UX or the speed? Right, the speed, right? No one has the time now to waste it, right? So I don't know if that actually answers your question, but
I think we're all agreeing that simplicity and speed is the new UI.
yes,
That's what people want.
yes.
I would add intuitive as well. And I think for the player to feel natural in the environment you can create. So they're not, obviously they're thinking, but it's more subconscious, right? If I click there, this happens. And it reminds me of years ago when I was selling slot games, B2B. One of the biggest companies in the UK at the time said, I love this game, but I need to educate the player. And if I educate the player, there's a chance I lose the player. So actually it's about keeping things simple, but there's no point in having speed if it's not intuitive, because you get the player to a point very quickly and then they drop off everywhere. So I'm not going to give you a speed or UI. I'm going to say as with everything, the answer is complicated and it's multifaceted.
Oh, 100%.
I think I would say, I will also define if we are talking about long-term strategy brands, that depends on the geography and the product, or the shorter term where the regulatory scene is changing more dynamically. And I think that's where dynamic products on platforms were sometimes and more so often supported by, AI, vibe coding, and, speed of the action as well. How quick you can implement a feature, how quick you can change a feature on the website, how quickly you can optimize certain things according to the KPIs you are seeing on the product itself. So it's also very important to be dynamic nowadays. And yeah, if you are in the like US or sweet product, social and whatnot, being flexible, it's even more so important than just focusing on one of these items.
100%. And I think one interesting factor that we're actually looking at now, and I think this is where we go full circle. We spoke about it earlier. Simplicity, UI, speed, right? That's essentially the most important thing. But let me ask you a question on this one, which I really like. You were looking at data. We're all looking at data. How many games does your average player play, on average? I'm going to start with you, Nikola, on this one. What do you think it is? 3, 4?
3, 4, yeah.
3, 4.
Every market has its own few games, that's it.
Sportsbook, I reckon, is quite similar. We're looking at very similar leagues. Yes, you have groups, but ultimately, we do have these massive offerings. And us as a brand, we have the same issue. We've got 19,000 games, of which I think no more than 5% gets played.
Yeah, I think we got more than 90,000. It's not a competition. But what I'm saying there is this industry, and I think there's one word we've missed, and it's commitment. As a brand, you have to have a long-term vision and a long-term commitment. And this industry, you mentioned gamification. Gamification died off because as an industry, we fall into these what I call fadisms. It's AI, it's gamification, it's personalization. And people just adopt it without understanding what it is. If you ask many people in the industry what gamification is, it's not an invitation to ask me, they'd have a misunderstanding. I'll put a leaderboard on it. Or they look at, people don't understand why things are successful. And I think actually you're in a position where a lot of lobbies are dictated by key suppliers paying to have prime positioning. And I think that's where if we get personalization right, it could be really interesting to see actually, are certain games the best, or is it just because these companies have the biggest spend to push their games in front of the player?
100%, and I think that's essentially where we're going. Every part of the industry, I believe, is doing full circle. We're coming back round. We first started with something simple, we made it complicated, we added gamification, and now we've gone back to the beginning, which we will switch on to a couple of the audience questions right now. And I'll tell you why, because actually one of them, I think we've just skipped it, and I really wanted to jump onto one. I'm gonna jump onto it anyway for the Slido. And Nikola, I'm gonna start with you on this one because I actually really liked it. That's the one I wanted. How can smaller or growing brands avoid copying? We're saying that we've gone back to simplicity. Let me ask you a question, Nikola. I have a small brand with a limited budget. How would I go into the market?
It's so simple. Just get that one unique thing. I don't know what else to say, but just be unique in some small way. What I'm seeing across, like everywhere, basically, everyone keeps copying each other. Like, I'm quite sure, Simon, how many copies you can see? Like, ton of them.
A few.
Well, this is essentially it. Wojtek, I know you want to mention
I can
this
just add to that. Based on one of the case studies I had very recently, there was a brand with not a big budget starting on early last year. And again, we have a lot of brands, a lot of new products coming to the space, right? You asked before how many games the average player uses or play, right? But the other question is how many accounts does the player usually have in the geo as well, right? And how do you retain these players? So the case was that the brand basically did not have enough sufficient budgets to get the streamers or build something amazing with product. What they did, they literally took two amazing guys who had a very good outgoing skill with the phone. One of them was a car mechanic a year ago. Today he has 600K followers on Instagram. He's fully self-built streamer. with 1 million revenue share a month for this brand.
Is that the hey no
And
way?
this is, I think, this kind of unique piece you can add, but it's something, okay, it's not happening every day, it won't happen for every brand, but this is something that, you know, out of the box you can sometimes build, self-build, either a person, either a product feature, something different than the others do.
Fantastic.
I think if the question is what advice would you give to small brands with limited budgets, I think the first thing is understand who you want to be, understand the market you want to enter, and if you've got a small budget, I'm making an assumption here, so correct me if I'm wrong, that you're going to have to choose a platform provider because you're not going to be building your own platform. And I think that's key. You know, a lot of these platforms, and I'm not here to endorse anyone, spend a lot of money on marketing and building the biggest stands and making a noise in the industry, which is fantastic. I've been there. But at the same time, really choose your platform very carefully and understand that that platform fits the market you want to enter.
100%. Look, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I would have loved to jump into more detail. What I would recommend is speak to our panelists, find them after the show, find them on LinkedIn, because these are the guys that know what's happening within the industry today. I want to say thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a warm hand, and thank you, AIBC.
Thank you, Oliver.